Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Jared Hornbeck, but that's not really the point, is it? And I'm coming to you from a rare book annex here in Brooklyn, New York, but I am not venturing into the world of this movie alone, am I? Who is on the other end of this call with me?
Well, it is I, strident librarian Steve Guntley, and this is the podcast about tiny Draculas, horny books, and Viking women from another dimension. That's because this is the podcast about The Creeps, aka Deformed Monsters, the movie that asks the question, what if Universal Monsters but smaller? And I'm excited to talk about this one. I think it was a lot of fun details to dig into, and we have somebody here to help sort through this. So who's joining us today, Jared?
Excellent. I'm glad you should ask. We do have somebody with us, and this is a local New York-based filmmaker who is the co-writer and producer of a movie called Polybius. Did I say that correctly?
Polybius.
Polybius. And that is notable because it stars one Tom Atkins. I'm talking about Mike Tuite. Mike, man, thanks for joining us today. Really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, very cool. So I wasn't aware of Polybius. Is this based on the myth of the video game, the mythical arcade game that supposedly kills people?
It absolutely is. Yes.
See, that's why I didn't know what this was. I was like, this should be a word I'm familiar with.
Oh no, yeah, no, it's based on the arcade game Urban Legends. My buddy Jimmy Kelly and we wrote it together, and we we wrote this role. You know, you mentioned Tom, who's the man, by the way, national treasure. That man. We wrote this role of Sheriff Atkins because we wanted like a Tom Atkins type. Never in a million years did we think we'd be able to get Tom Atkins for this role, but we did, and the rest is history.
That's amazing. Oh my God. And you're donning him on your shirt right now, which is a perfect tribute to him. So there you go.
Damn right. I'm Atkins all the way. He's the man.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say you kind of led with it a little bit there in introducing the fact that you worked with him and got him for the part.
Sure.
But, I mean, let's break format for like a minute or so. Just what's Tom Atkins like? I have to know.
Tell us his smells.
Let me tell you, no, Tom seriously is like the man. Like everything great you've ever heard about Tom, I swear to God, it's all true. He was the coolest guy to work with. I mean, he hung out with everybody on set all day. He's telling stories. He's taking pictures. He's talking to everybody. I mean, not just, the key crew members or the cast, but like background extras. He's just hanging out with them. He's talking to everybody like they're his peers, like he's the man. And he's an absolute dream to work with. He and I have kind of become friends, which is super cool. I mean, I grew up idolizing this guy in all these classic films he's in. I mean, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch is one of my absolute favorite films. It's the Hill I'll Die on. I'll defend that movie till I die.
Oh yeah.
I think we're past the point of having to defend that movie. I feel like it's been reappraised to the point where now it's a classic, and now there are people who are fighting back against the reappraisal, saying like, "Oh, you guys are just building this movie up ironically," and it's like, no, like
it's genuinely a good movie.
It definitely it was a punchline for like my whole life, that movie, and now people are they're reappraising it, and I'm glad they are. I'm certainly no gatekeeper. Like, no, you didn't like it before. Screw you. Like, no. I'm glad everybody's coming around to it, and it's awesome.
I've kind of come full circle from like believing that part 3, long before I saw it, like that's it. Everything you hear is that part 3 is like the bastard child of the Halloween series because there's no Michael Myers, and now we've had so many like diminishing return Halloween movies that I'm like, can we go back to this anthology format? Like, maybe they were onto something all along. Maybe let's leave Michael Myers out of it for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I know where you stand, Mike, on Halloween movies and on Halloween 3 in particular, but I want to know now. Full Moon is, it's a weird sort of subset of horror movies. Like, you have certain paths, I guess, in your life, and some of them will lead you to full moon when you're younger, and some will lead you to full moon when you're a bit older and you're a little bit more discerning and you cast a wider net out of like knowledge you want to learn about movies. And then there's probably 90% of the population for whom the road never meets full moon.
Mhm.
So where did this really begin for you? Like, were you somebody who was aware of the company when you were younger, and like how did you find it, and what were some of the things that you remember about your early full moon memories?
So I guess before I was really aware of like Full Moon as a company, I was aware of a lot of the classics, a lot of the films under the the Empire banner,
Sure.
the Full Moon banner, a lot of the classics, and you guys have covered a bunch of them already. But that's I was aware of the films more before I was aware of the company and Charles
Mm.
Band and this bigger university kind of built, which is awesome. And you know when I was younger, I guess, yeah, I was aware of some of these films. And so, but now as an older guy and someone who really goes back into some of this other stuff, now I'm really appreciating some of the gems in there that aren't the ones you've heard of. And again, that's one of the things that I love about your show, to be honest. Like I've been listening to every episode. I think you guys are doing a great job, and it's
Oh,
cool
thank you.
hearing some. Oh, of course, you're welcome. It's been cool finding some of these gems that I didn't know about, and it's cool. And your shows actually come up in conversation with people now out in the wild. It's funny. I was at I was at the New York City Horror Film Festival a couple weeks ago, and one of the gentlemen I met there that I was walking, I was hanging out with him. I was walking back to the train with him one night. It was actually Ricky that you guys had on a couple of weeks ago for Witch
Oh,
House.
no shit.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so we're talking about stuff, and your show came up, and then he was saying, "Oh yeah, I was actually on," and I'm talking. I'm like, "Wait a minute, you were on like this week." I'm like, "I heard your episode," and I was able to figure out it was him based on things you were talking about. And then it came up a second time because Brian Smith, another
Mhm.
gentleman you
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
had on. I go back with him for years. He runs the screenplay contest, and he's one of the programmers at New York City Horror Film Festival. So it came up twice in one weekend, and I was like,
That's
"Oh my
so
god,
crazy.
it's great!" So I made sure to tell some people about it when I was there. Say, "Hey man, it's a great show.
Yeah.
Definitely check it out."
Oh,
So
I
Hey,
appreciate
and
it.
we appreciate that.
of course.
So I mean, of all the movies you could have talked about, I'm curious, why did you want to talk about The Creeps? Is this a movie you've seen before, or were you taking a gamble and just wanted to check it out?
So a little bit of both. It was something I'd seen pieces of this, on like
Okay.
late night TV when I was a kid. I remembered, especially once I looked it up, and I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah!" Like, I mean, how could I forget the iconic image of like Phil Fondacaro as Dracula? You know what I mean? Like, so I was like,
Yeah.
I have seen pieces of this. I know I have. And this would come up in conversation too. Again, tying back to Tom Atkins because like Tom Atkins is in Night of the Creeps. You know what I mean? The classic,
Right.
Oh yeah.
film from what was it? Fred Decker did like Monster
Mhm.
Squad, like,
Mhm.
and so people sometimes would go to mention one and they'd mention the other. And they're like, was Tom Atkins in the Creeps? And I'm like, no, 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 he was in Night of the Creeps, different film, And they're like, are you sure they're two movies? I'm like, I'm
Not
100% sure they're two
not to be
different movies.
confused with Creepers, which is the
Yeah.
American version of Dario Argento's Phenomena.
Right.
There you go. See that? Titles and horror,
Or
they
to be
start to
confused with,
overlap.
yeah, or with Creep, the hit TLC song from 1995. You don't want to confuse that one with this one.
You don't. No, no.
Well, let's talk a little bit about The Creeps and the interesting kind of behind the scenes stories making of this. So yeah, The Creeps, aka Deformed Monsters. That's the version I saw in Freeview was still called that. So hey, there you go. It was released December 16th, 1997. It's directed by Charles Band and written by Benjamin Carr. And it stars Rhonda Griffin, Justin Lauer, Bill Moynihan, Kristen Norton, Joe Simonton, Joe Smith, Thomas Wellington, and of course, Phil Fondacaro. So a little something about our screenwriter here. According to Wikipedia, Benjamin Carr was actually an 18th century composer, best known for his piece, The Federal Overture, believed to be the first American composer to set Shakespeare text to music, if you could believe that. Yeah, good for him. No, that's where it linked to.
Wow. How the mighty have fallen.
What a strange career, right? Yeah, first you're composing The Federal Overture and then The Creeps. No, but in truth, Benjamin Carr is a pseudonym for the writer Neil Marshall Stevens, who's actually going to be kind of an important figure for us going forward.
Sure.
We haven't run across him too often, but Neil Marshall Stevens, starting with around 1996 with Head of the Family, kind of became the go-to writer for all Full Moon projects for a little bit. And he was even around as like a punch-up guy for a lot of other different things. So we're going to be running into him a lot, as well as this is something that like it's come up when we've talked about movies in this era, but we haven't really devoted any time to talking about Kushner Locke. Like if you're referring to the history of Full Moon in general, you know, you have the Paramount years and then you have the Kushner Locke years. Okay. And that's where they went after the Paramount deal sort of fell apart. Kushner Locke, they had this run of independent movies in the 80s and 90s. I think some of the most notable ones are But I'm a Cheerleader, the classic LGBTQ comedy, Freeway, which is why technically Freeway and Freeway 2 could fall under the umbrella of our show, because they both count as Full Moon
They
movies.
sure could, and they very well might.
They damn well might. And I didn't realize this. They're the people behind the Brave Little Toaster franchise, which I loved as a kid.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that movie's locked off of Disney Plus, and I was always curious why, because Disney distributed it, but it's a Kushner Locke production, and that's why there hasn't been a reliable DVD release, or it's not really available streaming anywhere.
It's so funny you say that, Steve, because I never even made that connection. And I feel like I was scrolling Disney Plus one day and I saw like a Brave Little Toaster sequel.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, the Brave Little Toaster's on here. And I looked for the original and it wasn't there. And I didn't really give it a second thought. I kind of moved on to something else. But that was a VHS tape I wore out as a kid.
I did manage to snag a used copy of that movie on DVD a couple years ago, and that one holds up. That's a great little kids movie. I really like that film. But some of the highlights of the Kushner Locke era, of course, include Head of the Family, as we previously mentioned, Hideous, The Killer Eye, Zarkor, Retro Puppet Master, Blood Dolls, all of these, and almost all of these movies I listed were written by Neil Marshall Stevens. In all, he has either done punch-up or outright written more than 25 movies for Charles Band up to today. Like he just wrote Amy for Charles Band this year in 2023. So he's still going.
Should also be noted, I think, that he co-wrote the movie 13 Ghosts.
That's right. He did. Yeah. The Sam Raimi produced one, kind of a fun movie. Yeah. Definitely worth checking out. I have to say, the more of these that we're digging into, the more I'm kind of becoming a fan of the Kushner Locke era. Not necessarily more than the Paramount era, but they're really like, I feel like this is the era where Full Moon kind of gets its sort of grimy texture from, you know, like they're no longer worried about being mainstream. And they're also acknowledging that like they're never going to have the budgets that they did during the Paramount era. So they're going small and they're going weird and they're going dark and they're going funny. And like they also have this weirdly genteel nature about it. This movie, Head of the Family, Blood Dolls, they've all got this weird kind of florid Tennessee Williams sort of prose to them, which I always find really amusing because it's still just a gory TNA movie.
Right. We did Demonic Toys too, and that has Dr. Lorca from Hideous,
right,
which shares the same lead actress as this movie. And it sort of works. I kind of look at it as like a triangle or a trilogy, if you will, of like Head of the Family, this and Hideous really kind of come from the same DNA. It's very clear. And I'm with you. I like, even, you know, it's some of the weird swings they take in this period. I think you can have them land on something that is so odd but like endearing and just hilarious, like Head of the Family or Blood Dolls. I heard you refer to The Killer Eye as a highlight, and I take umbrage with that description. We'll inevitably get there at some point, but
I was throwing it out mostly. It is a notable movie around this time, and that people may have heard of that one more than some of the other ones. But mostly as an example of another movie that Neil Marshall Stevens wrote. So there are hits and misses in here. You know, they're not all going to be knocked out of the park. But I am becoming a little bit of a fan of this era, if only for how weird and different it is from the Paramount era, while still retaining a little bit more production value and spark than like the post Kushner Locke era, where it feels like they're kind of slumming for a bit. Like you feel like a lot of the energy's gone out of the room, there's still plenty of creative juice in a movie like this. So much so that this movie was going to be part of a Charles Band push to bring back 3D. This is once again an example of Charlie Band being ahead of the curve on everybody. So far ahead, in fact, that nobody buys into his idea. But he wanted to make this movie 3D. He saw the idea, he saw the potential for that to come back in a modern theatrical style. And so this one was completed in 3D. Like, it is possible to view it in 3D.
I would
although
love
it's
to
not
be able
clear.
to do that. I don't
Yeah.
really know how you do that because I was looking and it was like The Creeps in 3D, and it's like available in DVD with glasses not included. And I'm just
Right.
like, you know, of course, in true, you know, Charles Band fashion to put out a release that way. But I'm really interested now because the 3D, some of the framing of shots in this movie didn't register as clearly meant for 3D as it does in other movies. Like when you
Yeah.
watch Friday the 13th 3 or Jaws 3D, it's so blatantly obvious. Like, why would you frame and stage a scene this way? It doesn't make any sense until you realize. And in Friday the 13th in October, I went to see a 3D screening of part 3,
Mhm.
and the 3D was awesome. Like,
Yeah.
it totally changed the
Nice.
viewing experience. It was like, it's okay that they didn't set out to make a good movie because they made a movie where the 3D is fun and the 3D works, and that's the gimmick. And some of
Yeah.
the jump scares and some of the cool moments in the movie really land with the 3D and are borderline unwatchable in 2D. But I'm
Yeah.
really curious what difference, if any, it would have made with this movie, because it, with the exception of like the one like taser scene where the taser is kind of pointing on an angle at the screen, I didn't really pick up on much of. I mean, I guess it's maybe some of the little people, the actors with their hands kind of coming through things would be where it was,
Yeah.
but I really had a hard time. Like, it didn't register. When I read that this was originally 3D, I was surprised.
I I
Same.
I agree with you on that. Like, I mean, when he mentions like Friday the 13th Part 3 or Jaws 3D, like those are movies, and you watch them in 2D, you know exactly which moments are the 3D moments. If
Yeah.
what you know,
Why is
you
this
know exactly
yo-yo
which
hitting me
ones.
in the face?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
you
classic
know
like paddle
exactly.
ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one, I'm with you. Where I'm watching this, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell was in 3D in this movie. I don't know what moments. Yeah. So yeah, that's weird. You're right. I none of
Yeah.
them stand out like that.
Maybe like the Viking lady coming through the portal, like maybe she
Mm,
points a spear a little bit in a direction, but again, that's probably not enough to justify it. It's a weird
Yeah.
move, and it's not clear if it was ever actually screened in 3D. But like you said, it was released on DVD in a 3D format with glasses included. But this was in the pre 3D TV days where you had to have like one blue and one red, and you just have to watch the whole movie like that, just a little blurry and out of focus. But hey, they tried something ambitious with this, which I can appreciate. This is also among the first crop of Full Moon movies to be advertised online. That's right. Full Moon got a website in 1997, and so their crop of 97 releases, including Hideous and Shrieker, were all the first to be promoted on the website. So we are into a new era of internet. And I do really want to shout out one of our stars here. We've talked about him many times, but I feel like it's really worth saying. Phil Fondacaro is far and away kind of the standout part of this
oh yeah.
movie. And it's a movie that he himself is very proud of because, as he said, there's an interview, and it came from the video aisle, which again, plug, check that book out. But there's an interview with him where he just says, like, how often does a little person get the chance to play Dracula? Like, he's like, I know what the movie is. I know it's campy. I know it's silly, but like, I treated it like it was a real chance to play Dracula. Like, I took it seriously, and I really played the part. And I think you could really see it. You can really see it. I think he's giving a higher caliber performance than maybe the movie around him deserves, if I'm
Yeah.
going to be a little
Yeah.
catty with it. But like, overall, I don't want to be like misleading here. I overall enjoyed this movie. Like, I just kind of found myself wondering what the substance of it was.
He
I
plays it 100% deadly serious, which I think makes it enjoyable because he's super committed. And when you boil this down to what this premise is on paper,
Mhm.
there are about 1,000,001 ways where this thing could go wrong, like horribly wrong. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a testament, I guess, to one, to Phil Fondacaro's performance and the way he's presented. Like, even though he is a little person and he's playing Dracula, that's never played for laughs, which I appreciate. This could have really easily devolved into like, oh, this is the punchline. It's like they're monsters, but they're little, so they're not scary, and we're gonna laugh at them. And I don't get that sense from this, and I was really glad watching it that that wasn't the way it went. I felt like it's just sort of the obvious way that maybe someone else producing this movie could have taken it, but I'm thankful that they didn't, and that they treated it seriously in that sense, and let Phil Fondacaro have a lot of fun with playing a real role,
Yeah.
and not playing, something that the audience was going to laugh at, because I don't think
Yeah.
you ever get that in this. And he's really commanding, and I'm glad he's allowed to bring that energy, because if the whole rest of the movie was a punchline about how silly it is that the whole joke is they came out of the machines as little people, then his performance would feel so out of place, and it doesn't. And I'm just
No, and
thankful that I never felt that
I'm
way watching it.
I had the same thought when I was watching this. I'm like, this could just be a series of cheap gags against little people, and that's why, like, even that title, The Deformed Monsters, I'm glad they didn't stick with that, because like that makes it sound like it's a cheaper joke than it is. But that also feeds into sort of the identity crisis I was talking about with this movie. Like, it's definitely going to be a comedy. Like, it's trying to be a comedy. I don't get the sense that it's trying to be scary at all, but it's refusing to make jokes. Like, and to be clear, I don't want them to be making jokes at the expense of people, but it's also just kind of, we're supposed to get the entire comedic premise off the idea that these are monsters that are also little people. And that's not an inherently funny idea. Even if they're not poking fun of it, they are drawing attention to it in a little bit of a way. But it's not really a funny idea, and they don't try to plus anything else up with that. Like, the characters still respond to these monsters as if they are every bit of threat as a normal sized Dracula.
Yeah, I agree with you on that too. The characters are very much intimidated and afraid of them. The guy who's setting this whole thing up, who's trying to make them, like he's still terrified of them. He backs down from them.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I like that they didn't try to play it for the joke. They played it straight. And going back to what you're saying with Phil Fondacaro, it is great to see him get to do something different. You know what I mean? Get to really just chew on a character. And that was something also you guys had mentioned in another episode previously, where he'd played a whole bunch of characters that were just like, okay, he was cast in this role because he was a little person, but it was cool that Charles Band gave him something to do and kept saying, hey, I'm gonna have something good for you. And this was something where he got to really sink his teeth into it and play something cool. And so that was awesome.
I think Mike Ghoulies too, I think, is what you're probably thinking of, because I feel like we had that conversation about how he was cast just as a character. Like, his size was not consequential to it.
They did the same in like Troll and a lot of it. Weirdly, like I think Charles Band is pretty good about casting him. If he's going to use him as a costumed character, he's also going to give him a part, like a speaking role where he gets to show his face and be like a human being, like, which I always really appreciate. And I was kind of surprised looking at I was taking a look at Phil Fondacaro's IMDb. He has not acted in anything since 2009, so I didn't realize that he's kind of been like retired for a good long bit. He's still with
15
us,
years,
but, but that's a good long time without any Phil Fondacaro on. But hey, he worked his ass off in the 80s and 90s. So
yeah, I mean, and the big thing I remember him from first, it's probably the same thing a lot of you guys remember him from. Obviously, in Willow, he's Buncar, the greatest. He's the greatest warrior in the village. He's awesome in that movie. He just kills it.
He's great.
That's what. Yeah, that's what I first remember him from.
Oh yeah, I mean, that distinctive voice too is great. Like, you always know when he's around. I mean, yeah. So that's kind of an interesting place where this movie finds itself, where it's like, it's not scary and it's not really funny, but it's also not boring. It's not unwatchable, and it's got some funny stuff in here. It's got some interesting stuff in here. I think it's mostly interesting. I would say if I had to figure out kind of what the mission statement behind the Creeps is, it's that Charles Band wanted universal monsters as little as like tiny terrors. Like he wants to make everything tinier because that's scarier to him or funnier to him or more interesting to him is when they're tinier. And he loves the Universal monster movies, as we've seen with other films like a Puppet Master 2 and things like that. So it makes sense to bring them into the canon. You notice he's very careful about saying that these are not the Universal versions of these characters. And it feels like that was a last minute workaround because it makes sense to have a character working in a video store more than a rare bookshop. You have a character right there. And so somebody could be going in and just renting copies of these movies and uploading into this thing. But instead, he needs to go and get the actual original manuscripts of the books.
Well, it can't
Even
be
when
the
he
Monster
stretched it,
Squad.
yeah.
It's
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
it's got to be
Yeah.
something different. There's got to be something to
Sure.
separate it. And so, and
Yeah.
that's a little anachronistic too, because like the Mummy is not based on.
It's not based on a book.
A book. Yeah, the Mummy we think of is from the movie adaptation.
Sure.
But we can talk a little bit about the rest of the cast too, because they're playing a lot of things really broad. I mean, we've got people who primarily are bringing soap opera type performances to these things, which I think is kind of right, which is kind of the right move. I mean, we've sort of described some of the Kushner-Locke era of Full Moon as being like this sort of weird Tennessee Williams type thing. And so I think there's a lot of that New Orleans type drama that is inherently built into some of the storylines and things here. Rhonda Griffin is doing it. I'm looking at it right now because I forgot his name off the top of my head, but the guy in the movie who plays David, Justin Lauer is the name of the actor.
Yeah.
Bill Moynihan, who plays Berber, they all have this kind of like over the top energy that they bring. And I do think this is my own opinion, and I feel like Steve is probably going to agree with me because we haven't really had much of a chance to talk about this, but we will as we get into the other ones. But when you put this one up against the other two that I mentioned from what I call the triumvirate or the trilogy of these Neil Marshall Stevens movies, this movie sadly is missing some Jacqueline Lavelle.
It is definitely missing some Jacqueline Lavelle. I think more movies of this era could have used some more Jacqueline Lavelle in it. No disrespect to the actors that we got. I think these characters are fun, and I will say, I want to see an entire series of mid-90s private detective who works out of a video store. Like, I genuinely want to see, I want to write these pulp novels of just like a guy who knows too much about movies and lives in a video store and he solves crimes. I mean, that's basically what I do, except for, two of those things.
It's such a quirky premise. Like it would work for like such a kind of small scale show. And it would have been super fun. I like that too. It would have been, I could have, it's something that could have been on USA, Characters Welcome, right after Psych or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Where else are characters welcome? They're nowhere.
One of the other things I loved about the video store is in a very Charles Band way, they make reference to other films in the Full Moon, where one of the guys checking out movies is asking if they have Head of the Family or if they have Idiots yet,
Yeah.
Which is,
do you have Idiots yet? I love that because that was probably just finished wrapping shooting when this.
Oh my
God! They
right?
weren't sure which was going to come out first. Yeah.
So yeah, that was funny. I like that.
I also like too that most of the posters in the video store were authentic, like of the era posters. But the full ones were all in the back room, which I thought was a funny little dig at themselves. They're just like they're all hanging in the back office where nobody could see them. But all the video store stuff was gold, and I thought Justin Lauer, we've encountered a lot of kind of blandly handsome kind of soap opera-y leading men in these Full Moon movies who don't really pop, and I think he's better than average. I think he's got a little bit more manic energy that makes him kind of a goofball and more likable. And Rhonda Griffin's playing it a little goofier too. Like she's got a lot of energy as well, and just kind of like playing to the rafters. Like she does ditzy very well, and I don't know if that necessarily translates to somebody working as a rare books dealer, where you tend to be a little more composed and erudite, you know. But hey,
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
pulling it off. But you can tell she has the job because she has a aggressively gay boss.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
is really coming after her.
This
And
lady,
all the
this
books.
lady does the Mary Warrenov character really well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely playing like a very big, you know, this was the big sort of stereotype about lesbian characters back in the 90s. It's just that they are very powerful and kind of domineering, and rub books all over themselves. Apparently that one appeared in a lot of different movies. Like they just got
Yeah.
real worked up over books. Yeah, there's the joke that this movie keeps going back. So really the central premise of this is that a mad scientist wants to bring the great monsters of literature into our world to do his bidding, but the ritual gets interrupted halfway through, and so the monsters come out only half sized. They don't really act any differently. They're just aware that they are shorter than they should be, and they need to get the girl back to finish the ritual so they can be restored to their size. And so the recurring kind of gag throughout this movie is that it needs to be a person between the ages of 25 and 35, naked and a virgin. And they have to keep saying naked. It's just like, you don't need to keep justifying to me why you're putting nudity in this movie. I understand, you know, I get what you're going for.
Sure.
But Charles Band always has a bit of like there's such a perfunctory approach to nudity, and he wrote about it in his book. Like he feels uncomfortable being in the room with it. He feels uncomfortable asking actresses to do it, but he also realizes it's one of his signatures, and so like he'll toss it out there. It's not going to be like lingering or creepy or anything. It's usually played for laughs, and then just kind of move on. Feels more checklisty than like working out a fetish, you know. So that's something I can appreciate at least.
They have like up on the wall of the production, there's like a call sheet, contact info, and then just like the full moon rubric. Like, do we
Yeah.
have all of these things?
Oh, geez,
You
yeah.
know,
How tall is your monster? Can we go down about 30%? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the usual approach, you know. But so it's a pretty breezy 75-minute full moon movie with, again, very long credits at the beginning and the end. You know, it's a sneaky little move, but you know, it sustains the amount of story that this movie has, which is really this kind of ongoing bit of chasing down our heroes, strapping them into this chair, and then grilling them about their sexual histories in ways that are a little uncomfortable and not very clearly elucidated. Like they keep going back on it. Like, I don't know. I felt a little icky about the lesbian boss being claiming she's a virgin because she's never had sex with a man, you know. So that felt a little icky. But also like a very 90s understanding of female sexuality. So
Yeah, very much of its time in that way. And again, I think that if we're talking about mid to late 90s, like good on Full Moon for not, like we said before, not having this devolve into a series of jokes about little people, because it very easily could have. But I mean, a movie from 1997 is, a lot of it's probably not going to age particularly well, especially the sexual politics and stuff is so different now. And so luckily it's to the point where we can kind of roll our eyes a little bit, but doesn't, you know, like some of the properties we've talked about, it doesn't really ruin your enjoyment, luckily. It's not to that extent.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think, you know, it's about as cringy as Chasing Amy around the same year. So, you know, there you go. You can look back on both of those. The Creeps and Chasing Amy is the two big movies of queer representation of 1997. You know, so there you go. But you know, like I enjoyed kind of the banter between the two leads, and I enjoyed the energy that our little people actors were putting into the Creeps. And Bill Moynihan is a very fumbly, sweaty, manic version of a mad scientist. Like he's not going the usual route of cackling. You know, he's got bringing more energy of like an underling rather than a main mad scientist. But I guess that's the point, is just to make him seem crazy.
He's more Otis and less Lex Luthor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Big Otis energy.
And even the one time he tries to like step into the foray of being the Lex Luthor, when he's called on it by Dracula, he immediately backs down. And
Yeah,
so the one time he tried to assert that I'm the master here, and he just boom, he immediately backed down when he met any resistance.
yep,
So,
yep. Yeah, so he knows his place in the pecking order, but like, hey, Dracula kind of casts you, just give you some orders, you kind of have to follow him.
that's
But
right.
there are some bizarre, surreal moments in here that I really appreciate. Like at the end of the first interrogation scene, when they realize that the lesbian boss does not meet their criteria, they open a portal to another dimension and turn her into like a Viking opera singer warrior woman. And then she's just gone immediately again. It's one of those moments where I'm just like, if you blink or if you look away or like you catch a little
Yeah.
frame of it
It's
here or there,
true.
you're gonna think you imagined it because it
Yeah, it
doesn't have any
happens
bearing on
really
anything else.
fast.
Yeah,
The rules didn't apply. Like the rules for the others, they're in the case. They have the book that's going to determine what becomes, But she just gets sucked into that portal, and then she's this Amazonian, and it was like, what book was she hooked up to? Where did the source material come from for that? But we just roll with it.
yeah. She got hooked up to old Bugs Bunny cartoons. Yeah, so
I was gonna say that or Pollyanna.
or Clay Fighter for the Sega Genesis.
There
Either
you
way,
go.
all good options. All good options. Yeah,
I
but I
want to
mean, but it
talk
is a
for a
great surreal
second
moment. Oh yeah, go ahead.
about some of the so like Phil Fondacaro's makeup and red contacts look pretty cool. The
Yeah.
Frankenstein looks pretty cool. The Mummy is fine. Let's talk about the werewolf in Paris or Wolfman here because was this design true to what the character should have looked like? I felt like there was a big gap between like this is clearly Frankenstein's monster, this is clearly a mummy, this is clearly Dracula with the fangs and red eyes and cape and everything, but this I mean it looked like more like a troll.
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, it was a weird design.
I'm wondering. I mean, I can't imagine the Wolfman design is proprietary, but like maybe it is, and they had to be a little more adaptable with it. I don't know much about the book that he was getting was The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Endore, which is I believe a French author or like a French. Yeah, yeah. And so like this is kind of this is sort of the book that provided the inspiration for our modern idea of the Wolfman. So like the Lon Chaney Jr. movie and everything like that was kind of loosely based on this. So I think it is again just trying to go for that Universal Monsters vibe without having to commit to it. He did look more goblin-y. He looked more trollish. He looked a little ghouly-y, if I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, what I was going to say with that too is, it's possible. Again, this is Full Moon. This is Charles Band. It's possible that was like a scrapped part of a scrapped makeup or mask or
Oh, it's
whatever
very
from
possible.
another. Yeah, very possible that was something that didn't make the cut in another film, and they said, "Hey, we got this. Repurpose this. This can be
Yeah,
a Wolfman."
they just reworked a seed people, Yeah.
Yeah,
There you go. You're a
damn right.
Wolfman now.
Just,
There
Damn
you
just
right.
go.
glued some hair to the hands and face of a sea people costume. I would not be shocked. That's actually a really good point. I wasn't even thinking
Yeah.
that watching it. I'm like, oh, it's weird. Yeah, I'm getting like a goblin leprechaun vibes from this
Yeah,
Wolfman, and then I'm like, am I not familiar
yeah,
with the source material? Or you made a good point, Steve, where you're like, they just don't want to give any money to the Cheney estate.
It could
Um,
be. But then again, the Frankenstein looked like a Boris Karloff Frankenstein, not like the
true.
description that would be in the Mary Shelley book. So, go figure. Hey, it's a nice little mix of both. I guess they just kind of got away with they pushed it as far to the line as they could. I guess they figured, Frankenstein needs neck bolts. If we're gonna do this movie, he's gotta have neck bolts, gotta get them in there. But I think overall I had a pretty solid time with this movie. I think it's definitely a pretty minor movie in the Full Moon canon overall, but it's notable because it could have been so much more offensive and cruel than it wound up being. You know, there's really none of that. But it also just leaves this movie in a weird place where like I don't know what it's really going for, because I don't really find any of it very funny, and I didn't find any of it scary for sure. So
I will say there one moment when I got a genuine laugh, and I don't even know if this was an intentional laugh. It had to have been though. When after Berber gets Rhonda Griffin's character like knocked out, and he just lays her limp on like the book cart, and he's rolling her around, and her body is just flopping around. I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny. Like the way the body is staged on the book cart was thrown on there so haphazardly. It had to be on purpose. I got a good laugh out of that one. I got a laugh out of the, not only like Mike was mentioning before, that Is Hideous available, is Head of the Family available, like people, them asking for full moon movies in the video store, but there's also a lot of references to other movies at other points in the movie too, which were all, I think, not full moon or Empire movies, but movies that were like public domain and then were distributed by Charles Band at one point. Like there's the Vampiros Lesbos is named at one point, and other movies that I think are used in like the best of Sex and Violence, I think is the name of that compilation movie that they put out.
They mentioned like Jess Franco and Larry Buchanan, like they do shout outs to a lot of kind of like cult figures like that, which is it's fun. And again, it reinforces that I want to see a Private Eye series with the guy with a lot of deep cut film references like this. Just like we'll call him the world's most insufferable Private Eye, you know. But I'm still watching his adventures every week.
Exactly. I like this idea. I think this is a Kickstarter, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Let's do it.
I wonder if each episode he's tracking down some case and he's just trying to get the girl at the end, you know, because she kind of seems like when he's hitting on her, she's not really giving him the time of day. She's not treating him like a serious suitor at all until he finally comes through, you know. But so maybe each one of these mysteries, it's a beautiful woman again coming to him with something, and every one of these he's just trying to get the girl, you know. And who knows?
Listen,
you know,
if
I like to think he's just trying to get his late fees. Yeah,
that's true.
That's true. Yeah. Did they ever collect on those? I don't think I ever made good on those. That and return library books. Geez. I don't think I ever paid those fees.
I was too afraid to ever let it get that far. I would return them diligently, because what if they didn't let me rent the next movie? You know,
of course,
afraid to go back. Just in case they did keep track of that, you know, book that never went back.
Right. There's a giant wanted poster with your face.
Say you owe $60,000 in late fees on this $10 book. But can I just give you the book? But no, we're way past that now. You owe $60,000. You've had this book for 25 years.
Someone's
and
like,
the gossips
that ship
too.
Sailed, and they're cracking their knuckles.
Yeah,
they'll be. They have a whole network. They're all talking about. Oh, you see that guy? That guy's 2 days late with his copy of The Natural. Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Well, and you know, if 2023 taught us anything, is that the world was clamoring for a Private Eye series that was weekly adventures with celebrity guest stars.
Yeah,
based on how amazing and popular Poker Face was.
Yes,
with going back to the old Columbo style, you know, presentation and Rockford Files and whatever would have celebrity weekly guests. Love Boat.
Yeah, Love Boat. Definitely Love Boat style. Yeah, Love American style. All of that. Yeah. Well, did we have anything else to say about the Creeps before we wrap up here?
Mike, I'll hand it over to you if you want to start us off with your sort of final thoughts. And you know, Steve and I know each other really well in terms of our tastes and opinions about Full Moon and Empire stuff, but I'm curious, like, compared to other full moon movies, where does this kind of fall for you, and what are your final thoughts on it? And then what if you had to just say, like, you know, maybe this isn't one you're going to revisit all the time, what are some titles that you gravitate toward?
Okay, so I guess when you're looking at it among its peers in the pantheon of Full Moon and Empire pictures, you know, it's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. One of the things I did kind of like that was different for me at the end of the movie, you know, where Dracula decides that he's going to go back into the book, essentially. You know what I mean? And like, because she makes a good point where in the books, you guys never truly die. You're always there,
Yeah.
and so he kind of decides, yeah, you know what? That sounds pretty good. And so that was kind of a different ending than a lot of these films. But it also conveniently leaves them there so that if we decide to revisit these characters and we can bring them right back, they're readily available on the shelf, But I thought that was kind of an interesting choice to take at the end, so that was kind of cool.
It's kind of a fun, like, meta narrative where it's just like, yeah, all right. So they're going to some interesting philosophical questions here with like, why are you behaving in this evil way? It's just because you were written to do this. You're pursuing this life that you never actually had because you were a fictitious creation of our species. So they're going into some weird. They went to some weirder places than I would have anticipated with that ending.
Yeah, you just brought that up, and I realized we didn't talk about that at all in terms of that ending, which is kind of a surprising ending. Like it's more meta and thoughtful, I guess, than I would have given it credit for. And I remember thinking it at the time and jotting it down, and then in having this conversation, we didn't really talk about it. But you're right, Mike. It's not really where you would expect it to go. I'm sort of in agreement with you that it's kind of in the pantheon of Full Moon and Empire stuff, real middle of the road. But like, if it's Full Moon or it's Empire for you, Mike, what are the standouts?
I mean, obviously the big ones, things like Reanimator, From Beyond, I mean, the Puppet Master series, those are really cool. I mean, in later years, I've gotten into some of the stuff like Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball, Bolorama, like
Of course.
really getting into some of the fun stuff like that. And again, it's one of the cool things with Charles Band and this whole world is, you love seeing them work with a lot of the same people again. And so sometimes some of the films you start looking up is because you say, oh, Linnea Quigley's in this. I love her. What else did she do?
Oh.
And then you start finding these other films that you never saw. And so, but for me, it's more films like that those are more my speed in the Full Moon and Empire universe. Those are kind of the movies that I gravitate toward and will watch over and over. But these fun ones like this that were, again, these are fun. Like you can just put these on and you can watch them and they're a good time, and I'm sure there's plenty of them that, there's a saying, you remember in, this is totally off base. Remember in Ocean's 11, there's like a part where Matt Damon's character is trying to they're telling him how to kind of play it when he's going to meet Terry Benedict, and they're like, listen, he has to like you, but then immediately forget you. Like you have to win him over in the moment, but nothing stands out about you where later on it's not going to matter. And so I'm sure in the hundreds of Full Moon movies and stuff, there are a bunch of them that are like that, where you're going to watch it, and you're like, this was all right, it was fun, but you're not going to need to revisit it. You're like, okay, it was cool. You're going to move on to the others. But the real classics, the ones that you come back to over and over, the ones that cross over where you don't have to be a Full Moon guy to I mean, Reanimator. I mean, that's as mainstream as the Full Moon kind of stuff really gets. Everybody knows Reanimator. You know what I mean? And again, you guys did a great episode on that. You covered it great.
We've only done
From Beyond.
We haven't gotten From Beyond. Not Reanimator. So that one's still in the tank. Tune in, ladies and gentlemen. That one's going to be great. That's right. Yeah.
You mentioned, Mike, Linnea Quigley, and it's been like one of my. You said, "What else is she in?" And then I started thinking, I'm like, man, yeah, what else is she in? Like, she's in a lot of stuff. And I was thinking, I'm like, man, you know what? Like, as this show progresses and as we cast our net out for more people and get more guests and keep doing this and get deeper and deeper, I'm like, I think one of my bucket list things is just getting her and Brink Stevens and Michelle Bauer on here for Nightmare Sisters.
Yeah. Nightmare Sisters. There you go. Yeah. I recently saw that for the first time. That was like a couple months ago. I finally watched it for the first time. And, it's, again, as you track down these films you haven't seen or you know of, but you haven't seen them, or you haven't seen them in their entirety, you start finding some of these other ones that they're not Full Moon or Empire, but they're kind of like Full Moon adjacent, and they have some of the same directors and writers and stuff. Like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers was one I saw recently that I hadn't seen I hadn't seen that my whole life. I knew of it. Hadn't seen it, but that's not full moon. But it's very much feels like it would be a full moon movie, and
It's
that's I
it's
believe
full
David
moon in
Dakota.
spirit.
Yeah.
Exactly, in spirit, so stuff like that is awesome.
Yeah, Linnea Quigley, if you're listening, email
Yeah.
us at puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to talk about this movie with us. And where can people find you on the internet? And is there anything so keep in mind that this is going to be probably our first February release, because we
Okay.
are pretty far in advance with stuff that we've got in the can ready to be dropped. But if you would be so kind, tell us anything you want to plug, or anything you want people to know, where they can find you, or anything that's important right now.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, and it's been great being on the show. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm on Facebook, Michael Tuite. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is I really should change this because it's the worst to try to convey to people. It's the real Mike Tuite, but with like a period between each word. So it's like terrible when you're trying to you're like, oh, it's the period, real period Mike. It's obnoxious. I need to come up with a new one. But so I will eventually. But yeah. So I'm on there. I'm on IMDb, Michael Tuite. But yeah, just working on some stuff. I mean, I'm always trying to get back to writing. I got to make more time. We are trying to get the feature-length version of Polybius off the ground. We're in talks with a couple different companies in LA trying to partner up on this thing. We have a feature-length script written. We have a modern-day sequel feature-length script written. So we're always working on stuff like that. But yeah, there's always things we're working on. But that's what's going on.
That's
Awesome.
amazing, man. It was great to have you. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you.
providing your expertise on the creeps to the degree that anyone can be an expert on the creeps.
Sure.
Yeah, we
Absolutely.
appreciate it, and we hope that you take that title with pride that we just bestowed on
Yes.
you, an expert on the creeps.
Well, I will wear it with pride.
And we appreciate that, folks. If you like what we do, jump onto Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Drop us a little 5-star rating and maybe a short review if you feel so inclined. If you want to follow the show on social media, you can find us on Instagram at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me at _Jallo_Jerry, or Steve at Minotaur Matador. You can also find the show on Threads, X, Blue Sky, YouTube, and a lot of different places. If you just search the title of the show, you will have no problem finding us. But we are not the only place where you will find Steve bringing you lots of amazing internet content. So Steve, where else can listeners of the show find you?
Well, you can also find me on my other show. It's called Cinemarcade, all one word, with the A capitalized. It's a combination of cinema and arcade. Get it? That's how I did it. We're talking about movies, and then we are playing the video game adaptations of those movies. Coming up on a lot of really weird ones in January, I believe. When this one airs, I don't know what we've got going on. We're well ahead of Cinemarcade in our recording schedule, so I have no idea what we're at. But we just finished up a Christmas month. We're going to do some weird stuff like The Punisher and Napoleon Dynamite and a couple of other weird ones that you may not know had games. So check that out, Cinemarcade, wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to check us out next week. Hey, everyone, this is Steve jumping in. We had a slight change in our schedule. Our guest was no longer available to record the episode that we had previously announced here. Luckily, we had another episode all lined up for you. So instead, we are going to be talking about the movie Cellar Dweller from 1987. It's directed by John Carl Buechler, and we're very excited to have Doug McCambridge from the Good Times Great Movie podcast on to talk all about that movie with us. Doug's a great guy. It's a fun episode. I think you guys will really enjoy it. We will see you then. Come dwell in the cellar with us.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us and tuning in every single week. If you like what we do, tell a friend. And we will see you next week for a double dose of early band with fairy tales and Cinderella. So long.
Keep on creeping.